Perhaps the most contentious waters dispute is in the South China Sea or East Asian Sea.
The South China Sea is one of the biggest flashpoints in Asia, involving China, several of its neighbors, and the United States. The 3.5 million square kilometer patch of water is one of the world's busiest shipping routes, and vast oil and gas reserves lie beneath the seabed. For decades, there have been competing claims over who controls these hundreds of tiny islands, reefs, and shoals and their surrounding waters.
China's sweeping claims of sovereignty over the sea and the estimated 11 billion barrels of untapped oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas has created disputes with Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam. As early as the 1970s, countries began to claim islands in various zones in the South China Sea, such as the Spratly Islands, which possess rich natural resources and fishing areas. More importantly is its geographic location in the Indo-Pacific maritime trade route.
Today, China wants to be a naval force across two oceans, the Indian and the Pacific. That's to make sure it can trade with the rest of the world and get enough oil and gas to drive its economy. And to do that, Beijing wants to control the South China Sea. But there's a lot of competition. Taiwan, for one, claims many of the same rights that China does. Then there's Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. They want to protect their turf, whether it's rights to islands, seabed oil, or fishing grounds. Indonesia's in there too, and the Americans, they want to protect those valuable shipping lanes.
The Geneva Accords of 1954, which ended the First Indochina War, gave South Vietnam control of the islands in the Paracel and Spratly archipelago. The Geneva Agreement of 1954, ending the First Indochina War, temporarily divided Vietnam into two states. The Paracel and Spratly Islands, being situated south of the 17th parallel, were under the administration of the South Vietnamese government. 2 years later, the North Vietnamese government claimed that Red China is the lawful claimant of the islands, while South Vietnam took control of the Paracel Islands. In 1974, toward the end of the Vietnam War, Red China used military force to claim the Paracel Islands and took Yagong Island and the Crescent Group of reefs from South Vietnam. A military engagement between the naval forces of Red China and the Republic of Vietnam in Paracel Islands ended by China's complete control over the Paracels. In 1988, again, it killed dozens of Vietnamese soldiers and occupied Spratly Islands. In 1988, Chinese frigates attacked Vietnamese guards on Johnson South Reef in the Spratly Islands, killing 64 Vietnamese soldiers. Red China since then practically took control of the whole Spratly area. The 9-dash line refers to the undefined demarcation line used by Red China for their claims of 90% of the major part of the South China Sea. The contested area in the South China Sea includes the Paracel Islands, the Spratly Islands, and from China coast down to that of Indonesia and various other areas.
For decades, there have been competing claims over who controls these hundreds of tiny islands, reefs, and shoals and their surrounding waters. China's claim to almost all of the South China Sea is indicated by these 9-dash lines. It says history backs up its claim because before 1930, no one disputed the sovereignty over the territory. But the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan say parts of the South China Sea belong to them. Tensions have simmered over the years, and sometimes they've boiled over.
As early as the 1970s, apart from Red China, other countries such as Taiwan, Malaysia, the Philippines, Brunei, and Vietnam claim islands in various zones in the Spratly Islands and Paracel Islands, which possess rich natural resources and fishing areas. In 2010, Red China published a new national map which incorporated a 10th dash to the other end of the line, extending it into the East China Sea. On July 12, 2016, An arbitral tribunal to the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea ruled that China has no legal basis to claim historic rights within its 9-dash line in a case brought by the Philippines.
In 2013, the Philippines brought arbitral proceedings against China to an international tribunal in The Hague. China refused to take part in the proceedings. Despite that, the tribunal ruled in 2016 that China has no legal basis to claim historic rights to the South China Sea. China rejected the tribunal's ruling. Since then, the Philippines and other claimants have done little to challenge China's continued development of the islands it controls. But after all these decades, the dispute remains unresolved over who rightfully owns these waters and the rich resources that lie beneath. In 2012, for example, the Philippine Navy harassed Chinese fishing boats and arrested the crew of one vessel. That escalated into a tense standoff between the Chinese and Philippine navies. Over the past 6 decades, China, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam have occupied islands in the South China Sea, reclaimed land, and built military bases on them to assert their sovereignty. China's efforts on this front have been the most aggressive. According to the US government, since 2014, China has reclaimed more than 3,000 acres in the Nansha or Spratly Islands.
The tribunal judged that there was no evidence that China had historically exercised exclusive control over the waters or resources within the 9-dash line. The ruling, of course, was rejected by Red China. Satellite imagery has shown China's increased efforts to reclaim land in the South China Sea by physically increasing the size of islands or creating new islands altogether.
This is Fiery Cross Island. It's a little more than 1 square mile in size, and it's home to a Chinese military base. There's a 10,000-foot airstrip, an advanced radar station, a missile defense system, and about 200 troops. But the strangest thing about Fiery Cross Island is that 2 years ago, it didn't exist. And neither did the 6 other Chinese military bases that have been built on man-made islands in the South China Sea. If you look at this satellite image from 2014, you can see huge Chinese ships collecting around remote reefs in the Spratly Islands, an archipelago in the South China Sea. In this image, these ships are rapidly pumping sand and rock up onto the reef. They're building islands. And less than a year later, the Chinese had seaports, air bases, and buildings on their new island, and the world had taken notice.
We continue our look this morning at what China does not want you to see. The superpower is reclaiming land
in 7 spots in the South China Sea,
adding on average more than 3.5 acres every day.
China's building these islands in order to increase control around the surrounding waters, using a strategy that they've deemed the cabbage strategy, where they surround a contested island with as many ships as possible. In May of 2013, China sent several ships to Ayungin Shoal, which is just 105 nautical miles off the coast of the Philippines, well within that 200-mile EEZ. The Philippines has 8 soldiers stationed there. Like wrapping leaves around a cabbage, the Chinese sealed off the Philippines' access to Ayungin Shoal with fishing boats, surveillance ships, and Navy destroyers, creating a blockade so that the Filipinos can't receive shipments of food and supplies. By building their own man-made islands, China is essentially building naval bases. The more islands they have, the more ships they can support, and the more territory they can slowly take control of. And the Chinese cautiously use the cabbage strategy in the Spratly Islands, taking over contested territory, but in small steps, avoiding the possibility of igniting a bigger conflict.
In addition to piling sand onto existing reefs, China has constructed ports, military installations, and airstrips, particularly in the Paracel and Spratly Islands. Additionally, China has militarized Woody Island by deploying fighter jets, cruise missiles, and a radar system, even though at a White House press conference in September 2015 with President Obama, Chairman Xi pledged not to do so. General Robert Spalding is a retired United States Air Force general. He was a U.S. senior defense official and defense attaché to China from 2017 to 2018. When asked how we should respond to China's aggression in the South China Sea, he said,
The Chinese Communist Party has been seeking to control the South China Sea for decades. In fact, there was a skirmish where they killed a lot of Vietnamese troops using machine guns. Our response was really to use the military to dissuade them. The military is really an ineffective tool to dissuade this kind of behavior by the Chinese Communist Party. A much more effective tool would have been to prevent our institutional investors, like retirement funds, from investing in companies like the dredging unit of the China Communication Construction Corporation, which actually built the islands in the South China Sea and did so while raising money on our capital markets. It's tragic to say, but while the U.S. military was trying to prevent the Chinese Communist Party from creating a military presence in the South China Sea, American retirement funds were actually funding that.
The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is meant to establish a shortcut to the 21st century maritime Silk Road, when passing through the Malacca Strait could present insecurities. Opponents of the project claim that CPEC creates geopolitical tensions in the region.
Like many countries in Central and South Asia, Pakistan has a stagnant economy and a corruption problem. It wasn't a popular place for foreign investment, that is until China came along. In 2001, China offered to build a brand new port in the small fishing town of Gwadar. By 2018, the port, as well as a highway and railway networks, became a $62 billion corridor within the BRI. It's where the economic belt meets the maritime Silk Road, and it seemed to benefit both countries. Pakistan saw its highest GDP growth in 8 years and forged a tight relationship with a major world power. China, on the other hand, secured a new alternative route for goods, especially oil and gas from the Middle East. Through projects like these, it also found a way to boost its economy. Chinese construction companies that had fewer opportunities within their own country saw a huge boost from BRI contracts. 7 out of the 10 biggest construction firms in the world are now Chinese. What tips the balance in China's favor even more is a requirement that it be involved in building these projects. In Pakistan, for example, Chinese workers have directly built projects like this highway here, and a Chinese firm has worked with locals on a railway here in Serbia.
On June 2, 2020, Forbes magazine reported that the port of Gwadar in Pakistan is being built for military use with satellite imagery. The Chinese government quickly denied the allegation. Ultimately, like Hong Kong to the British, Bataan to the US, and Macau to Portugal, Gwadar and Hambantota Port will soon become China's outposts for their naval world domination.